Let's face it, nothing beats snagging an absolute gem of a game at a ridiculously low price. Whether you're hunting for something action-packed, chill, or just plain wacky, these sales are the perfect excuse to load up your library without breaking the bank. Before we jump into these awesome deals, don't forget to like and subscribe for more gaming recommendations and bargain finds, because who doesn't love saving cash while gaming? Alright, let's dive into the list. Let's start with a gem like Iratus, Lord of the Dead. For less than the price of a fancy coffee, you're looking at one of the most underrated tactical RPGs out there. If you're into games that make dying part of the fun, this gives Darkest Dungeon vibes in all the best ways. The spin here is that you're playing as a necromancer, summoning minions from the corpses of your enemies. Yeah, it leans into the evil side, which is refreshing. What makes it hit differently lies in its synergy-heavy combat system. You aren't just picking any old skeleton or vampire for your team. Each unit works as part of this grisly puzzle where their abilities either amplify each other or crumble fast if you aren't careful. Managing resources like body parts to craft your army almost feels like you're playing some morbid take on a deck-building game. Maybe it could have done with a bit more originality in its art style, which feels just a little too inspired by Darkest Dungeon. That said, the game carves out its own thing with a surprisingly good skill tree for Iratus himself. Unlocking ways to burn enemies or spread curses gives this constant sense that you're on the verge of becoming way too overpowered. The permanent death for your minions stings just enough to keep you on edge in every fight. It's intense, it's clever, and it's $2.99. This kind of deal shouldn't even feel legal. Next up, we have Barotrauma. Picture this. You're in a submarine several kilometers under alien-infested oceans, trying to keep everything from flooding, imploding, or just flat-out exploding. And you're not doing this solo. This game demands teamwork, or more accurately, some healthy yelling at your friends. This is a game where every button pressed can ruin or save the entire mission. As the engineer, you're patching hull breaches and dealing with electrical fires. Meanwhile, the captain is trying to steer through underwater canyons, and the medic scrambles to treat a teammate who accidentally touched something radioactive. It's controlled chaos, except it's rarely controlled for long. The procedural generation means almost every run feels unpredictable. One moment you're chasing down a signal, then suddenly some horrifying abyss monster decides your sub looks like lunch. That tension is what puts this on a different level than your typical co-op game. It's got this old-school, low-res charm, which might feel a bit lackluster visually until you realize the gritty art makes the claustrophobia worse. The sound design really pulls weight too. The muffled thumps and screeches coming from outside your hull as the pressure mounts. It gets under your skin in the weirdest way. Criticism. Maybe it could use better onboarding for new players since the learning curve feels like steep diving straight into an abyss without pressure gear. Once you're in it though, few games deliver this mix of tension and hilarity. Up next is Days Gone, that post-apocalyptic biker adventure that had kind of a rough launch. Now, years later and at a massive markdown, it's highly worth a second glance. Riding through the Oregon wilderness on your very own motorcycle somehow manages to feel peaceful and anxiety-inducing at the same time. There's this constant looming threat of freaker hordes waiting to wreck your vibe. The standout feature here is the hordes themselves, a system that nails the sheer panic of running from hundreds of enemies at once. You're not slowly picking off zombies from a safe distance. You're bolting through abandoned towns, frantically setting traps, and praying you have enough fuel to escape alive. The open world is really simple, which helps make the survival aspect less overwhelming, something similar to early Far Cry games. Scavenging is steady, focus-based, rather than the usual grind. It feels like every piece of scrap you pick up counts for something, like repairing your bike or crafting a Molotov for the next ambush. That balance makes the world worth exploring. Now, Days Gone does have some rough edges. The NPC writing at times falls into painfully generic territory. Some performances feel stiff, which might make certain story beats less impactful. Still, it more than makes up for that with raw atmosphere and gameplay that practically forces you to adapt on the fly. For $12.49, the feeling of zipping through Oregon's foggy forest with danger always lurking is hard to beat. It's a game that grows on you, especially when given time to really dig into it. Next up is Shift Happens, a co-op puzzle platformer that plays like it's been designed to test friendships. You've got two blobs, Bismo and Plum, who can swap sizes at will, and the whole dynamic is built around figuring out how to use their shifting abilities to overcome obstacles. The puzzles are surprisingly clever, rarely repetitive, and always demand some level of coordination, which is where the chaos comes in. On one hand, it's a charming, lighthearted game with fluid controls and vibrant levels that feel alive with movement. On the other hand, sharing the spotlight with someone else leads to moments where alliances hit rocky terrain. You may be tempted to accidentally throw your partner into a pit just for laughs. There's something satisfying about these simple mechanics, which often require one blob to shrink down and squeeze through tight spaces while the other stays oversized to lift objects or act as a platform. It's not flawless, though. The single-player experience just doesn't hit the same notes. It's fine, but nowhere near as fun as the chaotic charm of playing with a friend. Still, for $1.59, this is practically a gift. You're getting hours worth of tricky puzzles and slapstick mishaps. It's like the price of a vending machine snack, except it lasts way longer and leaves you with fewer regrets. Now here's one with a bit more edge. Shadow Tactics Blades of the Shogun throws you into feudal Japan with a stealth-based strategy experience that feels like a modern-day love letter to commandos. Each mission asks for some seriously tactical thinking as you control a team of 5 characters, each with distinct skills. The samurai, Hayato, handles close combat, while Yuki sets up traps with such finesse that it's hard not to admire her work when enemies wander straight into them. The vibe here leans heavily on patience. It's not about rushing in guns blazing or swords blazing in this case. It's about scouting every guard route, planning the perfect ambush, and then executing it flawlessly, or, reloading when it goes hilariously wrong. The levels are complex without feeling overwhelming, offering enough variety to showcase how creative you can get with different character abilities. The stunning handcrafted environments are worth the price alone. Whether you're sneaking through snowy mountain paths or bustling castles, each map feels vibrant and alive. If there's any criticism, it's that the camera can occasionally be awkward, which feels frustrating when precise positioning matters. That said, the depth of gameplay more than makes up for that hiccup. At $1.99, this is a steal. It doesn't just scratch the itch for strategic stealth, it carves a whole new one into the genre. And while we're still in the Shadow Tactics franchise, I also would like to recommend getting Shadow Tactics Aiko's Choice. Aiko's Choice serves as a standalone expansion, bringing back the game's signature mix of strategy and stealth with a focus on one of its most intriguing characters. Aiko, the kunoichi assassin, gets the spotlight as you dive into her past while tackling gorgeous, meticulously designed maps. This feels more like premium DLC than a full sequel. It doesn't drastically change the formula, but adds just enough depth to what came before. The scenarios here push you to be more creative. The AI is sharper, the layout's more intricate, and the margin for error smaller. One standout mission involves infiltrating a heavily fortified manor with multiple entry points, each requiring different strategies depending on your team's composition. It's one of those maps that begs you to experiment, where even failure feels rewarding. For fans of the original, this is pure comfort food, offering a tight, polished extension of what made the first game great. Maybe the only gripe is that there's not more of it. The expansion is shorter, which might leave you wanting, but at $4.99, it's hard to complain when it delivers quality over quantity. It's the kind of content that reminds you why Blades of the Shogun stood out to begin with. Next on the list is Partisans 1941, a strategy game channeling the same DNA as Shadow Tactics, but placing it squarely in World War II. You've got a squad of resistance fighters operating behind enemy lines, each mission asking you to tackle objectives while staying a step ahead of stronger enemy forces. It blends stealth, tactics, and base building in a way that sets it apart from its contemporaries. The standout piece here is the tone. Unlike the more polished cinematic vibes of Shadow Tactics, Partisans 1941 focuses on the grit and desperation of guerrilla warfare. It leans into resource management between missions. You're scrounging for supplies, upgrading equipment, and making tough calls that often lead to sacrifices. It makes the victories feel earned rather than handed to you. The game thrives in its flexibility. You can ghost an entire map without raising the alarm, or turn one mistake into a chaotic shootout that scrambles your entire plan. The squad-based gameplay really encourages you to play to each member's strengths, whether it's sending Sasha to scout ahead or relying on a medic when things inevitably go wrong. The graphics are solid, but lack some of the polish seen in others of its kind, occasionally feeling a little stiff. Still, the narrative and gameplay push it far beyond its minor flaws. At $4.49, creating your own stories of survival, strategy, and sabotage feels like more than a fair trade. Up next, we have Scott Pilgrim vs. the World: The Game Complete Edition. This one's like stepping into a time machine and landing in the coziest corner of the arcade era. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up that oozes charm, with that retro pixel art and a soundtrack so catchy it feels like it's been hardwired into your brain. Anamanaguchi's chiptune bops elevate every fight, every combo, every retry after you inevitably get wiped out. The combat doesn't feel overly complicated, but there's just enough depth with unlockable moves and crazy weapons lying around, from baseball bats to trash cans. And juggling enemies midair, pure satisfaction. Something about teaming up with friends to beat down the evil X's makes this the perfect mix of brawler chaos and nostalgia overload. It's great that this edition gathers all the DLC, so you're getting all the playable characters and bonus modes in one go. If there's a small gripe, it's how brutal the difficulty curve can feel, especially if you're flying solo. It's almost begging you to get a couch co-op partner. Still, that quirky humor mixed with the surprisingly tight gameplay loop is worth every penny of the $4.94 price tag. This practically demands to be played with a few friends, some snacks, and a healthy dose of absurd laughs. Next up is Insurmountable. This one throws you on the slopes of treacherous, endless mountains, turning survival into a brain-teasing, roguelite strategy experience. Every choice feels weighted, whether conserving your stamina to scale the next icy cliff or gambling for resources in abandoned cabins. Each mountain climb becomes its own story, with randomly generated challenges ensuring no two runs feel alike. The tension builds slowly. Your climber's stats, mental health, body temperature, and, of course, stamina are all constantly edging toward failure as you make hard decisions about risk and reward. It's uniquely meditative while also quietly nerve-wracking. The visuals match the solitude perfectly too. Snow-blasted vistas and eerie crags that look gorgeous yet completely uninviting. The glowing edge here isn't just the raw survival gameplay though. It's the way each climb sneaks in unexpected narrative encounters. Maybe you find mysterious carvings etched into a rock wall or stumble across borderline supernatural events. It adds this element of mystery that keeps you crawling back. Now, it's not for action junkies. It's slow-paced and extremely thoughtful. At times, the dice rolls behind success and failure can feel punishing. Still, for under $5, it's a climb worth taking. It's not about beating the mountain, it's about surviving it, flaws and all. Up next, we have River City Girls 2. This game cranks up the brawling, RPG stats, and gleeful chaos of its predecessor. You're jumping back into the shoes of Misako and Kyoko, or a few new unlockable characters this time around, to save the streets of River City with fists, flying kicks, and plenty of attitude. The style here deserves its moment of attention. The animations go full-on anime-inspired, with ridiculously satisfying combos and a killer soundtrack pumping during every skirmish. The open-world approach makes things feel bigger without bloating the gameplay. Every area feels packed with secrets, quirky NPCs, and side quests that often veer into absurd humor. It's also crafted with co-op in mind. Whether local or online, teaming up with a buddy transforms the game into an utter riot. There's depth to the combat too. Juggling enemies with your friend, pulling off team specials, or carefully speccing out your character's upgrades adds a strategy layer beyond the over-the-top mayhem. The occasional screen clutter though, yeah, it's easy to lose track of what's happening when the camera zooms out and things descend into chaos in the best way. At half off, River City Girls 2 amps up the fun, whether solo or with a friend, and never really puts the fun on cooldown. If you have already played the first one, you should definitely grab this one, as it's currently available at a 50% discount on Steam. Now for something a little more high-octane. Roboquest takes the structure of a roguelite and bolts on first-person shooter mechanics, resulting in this hyper-kinetic, neon-drenched playground of endless destruction. It's got everything: cartoonish robot enemies, procedurally generated levels, and enough loot variety to keep you tweaking your build for countless runs. The speed is key here. Movement feels almost parkour-like. You're double jumping, sliding, and strafing like a madman. The FPS combat has the best parts of Doom and Borderlands, with weapons that range from satisfying machine guns to absurd plasma launchers. Each run cranks up the difficulty and rewards, making every death feel like a step toward finding your groove. Where Roboquest really shines is in co-op. Pairing up with a buddy takes the already chaotic combat and dials it into sheer ridiculousness. You can tag team enemies, experiment with complementary builds, and share the panic when a particularly nasty mini-boss shows up. It might not blow your mind with its story, but Roboquest knows its niche and stays there. The art style is pure eye candy, although some environments begin to feel repetitive after a while. For 30% discount though, you're buying into one of the most polished roguelite FPS experiences available right now. It's fast, it's relentless, and it's hard to stop once you've clicked start. Next up is Heart and Slash, a roguelike brawler with a style so vibrant it practically punches you in the eyeballs. You step into the metal boots of Heart, a quirky little robot navigating a dystopian scrap heap filled with hostile machines. It's as much about combat as it is about self-expression, tossing hundreds of weapons, upgrades, and cosmetic items at you so you can mix, match, and create the exact robot you want to be. The combat doesn't waste time easing you in, fluid, fast-paced, and heavily reliant on dodging and chaining attacks. It feels almost like a stripped-down Devil May Cry. Combined with the permadeath mechanic and randomized levels, the game keeps you constantly on edge, reacting to new environments and enemies every time you start over. There's a story buried in there if you take the time to engage with it, revolving around Heart's relationship to its creator and the enigmatic robot. It's thoughtful and adds a surprising layer of depth to all the manic action. Sometimes all that chaos can feel like too much though. The camera tries its best, but gets in the way during tight corners or fights against faster enemies. Yet for $2.39, it's the kind of game where you find joy in the imperfections, smashing apart baddies one combo at a time while grooving to a killer, glitchy soundtrack. Coming in next is Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 Grand Prix. This is a power move for anyone craving a simple yet chaotic kart racer that doesn't take itself seriously. You've got an expanded roster of Nickelodeon favorites, from SpongeBob and Rugrats to Avatar. It's loaded with game modes, unlockables, and the kind of whimsical tracks you'd expect, like gliding through Slime City or zooming past Bikini Bottom. The real charm comes from building your pit crew. This little system lets you mix and match abilities based on classic characters like Tommy Pickles or Reptar, giving each race a playful level of customization. You're not just mashing buttons to drift and boost. It's about balancing your team setup for the goofy abilities they bring. It's not groundbreaking game design, but it's a ton of fun when it all clicks. Where the game stumbles is the visuals, which feel a little on the low budget side. Some of the animations look stiff, and there are moments where tracks could use more polish. It hardly ruins the gameplay though, and at $1.99, it becomes a steal for anyone who grew up on Nickelodeon or just wants a laid-back multiplayer experience. This is pure nostalgia wrapped in a kart racing package, perfect for casual races or the kind of petty multiplayer rivalries that kart games thrive on. Another great game I recommend is Warpips, a tower defense meets real-time strategy hybrid that's one of those games you fire up and lose hours without realizing it. The key here is simplicity. You're not bogged down by micromanaging resources. It's all about smart decision-making on the fly. You'll pick your units, launch them toward the enemy's base, and watch absolute chaos unfold. The gameplay loop hits the perfect mix of strategy and spectacle. Every match starts small, with basic infantry duking it out on the battlefield. Then it scales as you unlock tanks, helicopters, and airstrikes, turning it into this frenetic war zone where every second counts. The progression system adds a lot to its replayability, rewarding you with new upgrades, units, and strategies to experiment with after each victory. Visually, it takes a minimalist approach, pixel art units against simple backdrops. But it works. It's clear, readable, and fits the arcade-like vibe of quick, action-packed battles. The soundtrack amps up that experience too, with energetic tracks that keep the adrenaline pumping. Its single shortcoming is that some players might want more depth. It's not going to scratch the itch for those who love the intricate details of something like StarCraft. Still, that accessibility is part of its charm. For $2.71, Warpips is the type of snack-sized strategy game that grabs hold and doesn't let go until you realize it's 2 a.m. Lastly, we have AER Memories of Old. This game is the kind of contemplative, soothing experience that feels like an exhale after a long day. At just $1.49, it's like treating yourself to a slice of tranquility. Here you play as Aiko, a shapeshifter navigating a serene world of floating islands and ancient ruins. The hook? You can transform into a bird and just fly. There's a simplicity to the way the flying feels. The controls are intuitive, and soaring through the sky while colorful islands and crumbled temples pass below is nothing short of breathtaking. The ambient soundtrack layers in perfectly, creating this calming rhythm as you explore a mysterious world that's as empty as it is alive. There's no combat. The gameplay is centered around puzzle solving and exploration, with a sprinkle of light platforming as you uncover the secrets of an almost forgotten civilization. Some of the puzzles feel a little straightforward, but that's not really the point. It's more about the mood, a meditative journey rather than a goal-oriented adventure. Visually, it stands out with its minimalist design. Think clean shapes and vibrant palettes that let you fill in the blanks. While the overall runtime is on the short side, AER Memories of Old is one of those games that you walk away from feeling lighter. At less than $2, this is a flight worth taking. And there you have it, folks. If you found any new games to add to your library, please let us know in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel.